Yeah, the little bags,
All right.
Yeah, I'm gonna take this off. I feel like this looks tacky.
Oh yeah, you know what?
And
You can't see
somehow,
mine. That's fine.
That didn't wrap.
I don't even
There
know
we
what
go.
this was for.
Yeah, I
You?
think it was just because you weren't allowed to get in if you didn't have that on.
I
We
felt
would've
like it was a
checked.
test.
It was a test.
Yeah, because it was red or blue. I was like, oh, red
I got
all the way.
green.
Well, oh, you did?
I did. I'm like Yoda.
That's my favorite color.
You got the Sith. I got green. I got Yoda.
Oh no, that's not
Yeah.
what I was thinking about. Green is my favorite color.
That's awesome.
It is. I paint a lot of my walls in my house green.
Now I feel
Like,
bad for taking it off.
Oh no, it's okay. It's all right. It was neon green. It's not like a deep, rich forestry, so it's.
I
I'm not
see.
that-
Fair
I'm
enough.
not
Like
that
more like the
closely
pants.
attached. The pants, yeah, stuff
Yeah.
like that. That
Yeah.
actually looks like a jumpsuit that I wear sometimes to,
Yep.
to work. Yeah.
You wear a jumpsuit to work?
Sometimes if I'm landscaping, if it's cold,
Fair enough.
it gets hot. Is actually a fighter pilot jet jumpsuit that my sister gave me from the Air Force, and I was like, this looks like a cool landscaping.
That's sick. No,
yeah,
that's sick.
it fits, and you know, it actually makes me look like I have good posture.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So, Michael, good to meet you. Why don't you introduce yourself to everybody watching? Like, give yourself a plug. What do you do?
I'm Michael Wilson. I am right now a radio host at Patriot Talk 920, a local Houston station. Our goal is to, of course, transform the greater Houston area. That means Fort Bend County, Montgomery County, Galveston County, Brazoria County, and so on and so forth, especially, of course, Harris County. And so I really take to heart the verse, expose the works of darkness.
Yeah.
Right? Because obviously, and I say this all the time, we can't solve issues if we don't know what they are. If I tell you, hey, solve a math problem, you go, what math problem? I say, no, just solve it. You got to know, am I solving 2 + 2? Am I solving integrals? What am I working with?
Sure.
And so my main goal in life and in work is to speak the truth, right? And so I actually have the phenomenal opportunity of being a radio host to do that. But that means diving into topics that some people won't talk about and saying, like, here's what I believe. And sometimes that'll get me in trouble. Sometimes people won't be so happy with it. Sometimes that'll mean that some sponsors are like, it might be a little too radical for our blood. We can't really, But that means that I'm called to do that. And so just speaking the truth on the air, that's what I do.
Yeah, absolutely. That's probably why God has put you in the place that you're in right now, and definitely going to be tested. I'm going to be testing you a little bit with these questions. Because,
I'm open to it.
I'm curious. I was going to ask random people these questions too, and I was like, I don't know if I should. But we're going to start with this first one. Who do you think killed Charlie Kirk?
I think all the evidence that we have right now points to Tyler Robinson. Okay. My main issue with a lot of, and this is, I don't consider myself a conspiracy theorist, but also I think everybody is a conspiracy theorist in the sense that there are real conspiracies, and if you theorize about them, then by nature you're a conspiracy theorist. With that being said, I also think there's such a thing as taking that to an extent with limited evidence, right? Like we'll talk about things like the moon landing or the biosphere, flat Earth style theories.
Yeah.
And there comes a line where you're saying, okay, I think it's a fair conspiracy theory to say that I'm not sure what happened behind the scenes of the Charlie Kirk assassination, right? Like I don't know who Tyler Robinson was connected to. There's some crazy stuff in his past that we don't know a lot about. I think those are fair questions to ask. Same with like JFK, right? Do you believe that it was just Lee Harvey Oswald? Were there any other connecting factors? Did it have anything to do with his foreign policy? I think those are fair questions that we all should ask. But I think it's also safe to say, like, we have to also do our very best to believe the facts,
right?
And to see whatever truth we can. And if there aren't verifiable pieces of evidence pointing to something else, then I'm hesitant to start just not believing what I think is true.
Sure. Very base, very reasonable. Makes sense.
Try to balance it.
Yeah, well, trying to balance what?
Conspiracy theorism with factual reality.
Well, absolutely. There's a few sayings I've heard of recently is, just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not out to get you.
Right.
And there's so many times that conspiracy theories have become conspiracy fact within the past few years.
You mean like gain-of-function research?
Gain-of-function research, or even the Epstein stuff, like sort of satanic,
P. Diddy.
The elites, all this stuff, P. Diddy, absolutely, all this stuff coming out, and it's getting crazier and crazier. It kind of leads me into some other questions of just where I think the nation, the culture is going to go. Here's my next question. How many Jews died in the Holocaust, do you think?
You really wanted to kick it off with the fun question.
There's a lot of these are more fun questions.
I will preface this by saying that the same with every other conspiracy theory, the reason that conspiracy theories often exist, not always, but often, is because people have questions. The problem with people's questions often tends to be that when those questions get shut down, instead of that just dissolving the narrative and everyone saying, okay, then that must be true, then people start to look at it a little more closely and say, why are you shutting the questions down, right? Why are we not allowed to ask about these things? Why are we not allowed to wonder? And in regards to the Holocaust, it's not even just the number of lives or the methodologies, right? Like finding out that the vast majority of those who did die in the Holocaust were from disease due to a lack of medical care, not from any sort of you can call it murder, but not from any sort of actual intentional second actor.
Criminal neglect.
Right,
Maybe, yeah.
criminal neglect at best. Right, that's the vast majority, and that's like statistically accurate. And so I think when we ask about the numbers, the issue isn't even so much the numbers. I think the issue is more the reality of what those numbers intend to mean. Right, because whether it's 271,000, that's a commonly cited number among a lot of people, 271,000 or 6 million, or some have even said north of 6 million, numbers in between, regardless of what any of those numbers are, the reality they point to is kind of the question of where do we get these numbers from? Are we obligated to believe narratives? And if I don't, and this is a big question for a lot of people, if I don't, is that the same as gospel truth? Right? If you and I disagree on a question of reality, regards to George Washington, how long did it take him to cross the river? And if you say it took him 2 hours and I say it took him an hour, does that change the reality of history? Am I allowed to disagree with that? And so I'm not historically knowledgeable to have a certified opinion on World War II's death count in regards to Germany and Poland. What I can say is that the reality is when we ask those questions, we have to be aware that people do lie. History books certainly lie. Civil War is a great example of this, where of course victors write the novels and victors write the curriculum.
I would say even the church is kind of getting to be more and more of that. What my own ideas. Anyway, continue your
Right. I think I kind of see where you're going. Maybe I do, but I was going to point out, it's treating historical questions as an arbitrage of reality, right? If I say, let's say that I came out and I said, I think I don't know, but let's say I think it was somewhere close to 300,000 Jews that were killed. If somebody then responds to that saying that I'm insane and anti-Semitic, I think that's where the issue starts to build up.
Yeah, for
is
sure.
Is that a gospel truth, right? Because if I say the divinity of Christ is not true, or if I say that there's no such thing as the Trinity, or I say that, well, Jesus didn't actually rise from the dead, that's just, we had to kind of create that to keep propping up the truth, but that didn't actually happen, that's just kind of one of our fairy tales. Well, I've just dissolved the reality of Scripture and the sacrifice of Christ on the cross.
Right, yeah.
I've just completely destroyed my perspective on the world.
And then what high authority is there? What's the point anyway? Why do it if it's not true?
Right. Yeah. And so where's the intent? If I'm required to affirm a certain number from 80, 90 years ago, why? Why am I required to affirm that? I think that's a much bigger question as to getting into how they build these sorts of narratives and how we're required to relate to them.
Sure. And even if it was only 10,000 people that Hitler killed, does that still make him a bad guy?
Correct. And that's another thing is why do the numbers actually matter all that much?
Right. And I think it's probably just the conversation question is like, why are we not allowed to question certain things?
Right.
And I think that's really where the crux of the argument is.
Especially when, and you can see this narrative being painted, when you have people like Mao Zedong or you have, of course, Stalin, right? And we know with the Bolshevik Revolution, we had 60 to 80 million Christians that were slaughtered. How often do we talk about that in our mainstream history curriculum? Most people don't even know about it. And so I think that's another conversation where it's like, and if you came to me and you said, well, actually, if you told me right then, I think only 50 million actually died in the Bolshevik Revolution, I'd say, okay, that's fine, no biggie.
Yeah.
Doesn't change the reality of what happened.
Right, yeah, sure.
But you can't do that with things like the Holocaust because there's a narrative that's built up to prop things. And so it kind of reiterates itself in, I don't know the answer, but the precursor conversation to why that answer would matter, I think, is far more important.
Yeah, and what I really just like hearing is somebody from TPUSA actually having some sort of good, thought-out opinion about it, because there was all that rhetoric with Charlie Kirk and all that stuff going on, and then Nick Fuentes and Israelites and stuff like that. And so you like to hear that there are people that are reasonable and based in their thinking. So.
And I think also, this is like the comical irony of I'm the most humble man who's ever lived, right? But the reality that so many people think they know far more than they know.
Sure.
And this is just a pride ego problem that I have to self-check every day. But the ignorance you have to display to pretend as if you know for a fact what happened 80 years ago is crazy to me. To think that you know for sure on either side of the political aisle, which is why I'll say I think we should talk about what we do know, which is a cultural conversation about what it means for us as a country, what it means for us as a people and a movement.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's a lot there. That's really good. All right, so next question. End women's suffrage? Should Erica Kirk be allowed to vote?
Why did you pull Erica? I could have answered it so much easier.
There's more here.
Without assaulting people. You're like asking.
There's more individual
Should these people, start pointing at individual people. You gotta get rid of them.
Should blue-haired women be allowed to vote?
No? That's an easier question.
I agree.
Absolutely not. No, I've had this conversation before, and I'm not shy about it. In the same way I'm not shy about female pastors being an oxymoron. It's not possible. The term pastor refers to a male head in a shepherding flock, and so it's not possible. In the same way, a lot of the things we do, and this kind of goes back to gospel reality, right? What the question should not be like, are these things gospel requirements? But how do we judge the goodness of something? And often in politics, the way we do that is by what it creates, the outcomes.
Yes.
And so people will often go socialism, capitalism as a moral thing, as opposed to a lot of the questions, well, what's most successful?
Right.
And all the statistics very clearly lay out that capitalism is far more successful than any socialism has ever been. Communism could ever be, just on the hypotheticals themselves. And so in similar fashion, when you talk about women's suffrage, you could turn that around and just ask, has this positively benefited the U.S. or negatively benefited the U.S.? And I don't just mean in elections. I also mean in what it means for the home and for the family and for leadership and male headship in general. And I think it's been a grave moral evil in our nation. And that'll get me called misogynistic, which is especially funny because I love women and I say that frequently.
Yeah.
I would often say the most misogynistic thing you can do is participate in a reality that actually ends up taking away the most important thing women can do, which is to be good wives and good mothers.
Yeah, depriving them of a great joy and fulfilling of a great function. Not that that's the only thing. I believe that our chief end is to enjoy God and to glorify Him forever.
It would be like going to Adam and calling him misogynistic had he stopped Eve from eating the fruit.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let her do what she wants.
That's a good example. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, she wants to do it. Just let her go ahead and do it.
Yeah, you did.
Yeah.
Anyway, so what do you think of the Hindu statue in Sugarland?
I think it should be torn down.
Amen.
Immediately.
Yeah, same.
I think if we're going to have any nation at all with any cultural heritage whatsoever, the only thing we really have to pull on is Christianity.
Yeah.
And the reality is this is so newfound mythology that says like the First Amendment was ever designed not only to apply to the states in the first place. This is why smarter men than I said Congress shall make no law, because it was never supposed to apply to state sovereignty in the first place. But furthermore, it was also, you have to understand, the founding fathers never imagined we'd be mass immigrating Hindus and Muslims. In fact, they use the term rolling in their graves. I think this would be one of those times where you'd apply that.
Yes, looking at the context, they never would have said that Islam and Hinduism was a religion. They would have believed in the one true religion. It would have just been all paganism to them.
Right, and it was paganism that wasn't within our own gates. And so it was never something that we really thought we would have to contend with. So we didn't need rights and laws pertaining to them.
Sure, yeah.
Same as like, did the founding fathers believe in drug laws? I don't know, because we didn't really have methamphetamine.
Sure.
So why would they make laws about it?
Yeah, absolutely. Very good. Okay. If you had to guess, what does Candace Owens dream of?
I want to do almost nothing less than find out what Candace Owens dreams of. There's almost nothing I'd rather. There's almost nothing I would rather do.
Sounds like a scary neighborhood.
It's like a very scary neighborhood. Candace Owens is another one of those people, and I said this before. It's not so much that she's wrong on a lot of things. A lot of it is not only hubris, and this happens again. We know the Conservative Party is fractured, right? You have the sort of Daily Wire, more mainstream Fox News style stuff, and then you have the Nick Fuentes, Candace Owens, and there's lots of other names, Alex Jones, Sneeko.
And I wouldn't even lump all those people.
Right, they're all fractured in their own specific ways, but I'm saying like people often view them as these two distinct sects, at least, where you have like the alternative or the mainstream.
Right.
And my issue with a lot of the alternative is that in the goal of being alternative, it almost bemes contrarian.
Sure.
And so you'll find a lot of
fighting yourself.
Right, you'll find a lot of Owen segments where not only will she self-contradict, but you'll find stuff where it's like, why are you even saying that? Does this benefit and build up? Or is it merely clickbait viewership style stuff? And so I have friends that listen to Candace, and I'm not mad at them. I'm kind of in the Michael Knowles train. I'm not going to start playing puppet show and start saying I'm denouncing Candace Owens and I'm denouncing Nick. Like, I'm not going to play the game. But I also think it's fair to critique that and say, like, there's obviously some stuff that's been said that's wild and crazy, and there's some stuff that's been said that's true. And this is another thing I've gotten into before, not to kind of read into the question. But I've talked a lot about how we've in many circles deified hosts, where we've started saying this person is who I listen to, therefore they're correct.
Sure.
As opposed to every single thing we hear should be with the goal of knowledge and critical thinking. And there may be some that you more closely align with. That's probably who you'll listen to. But everything you say, and I say this on my show all the time, please, if you have a disagreement, let me know. We should think these things through. You should hold me accountable and critically think about what I'm saying. Don't take what I'm saying as gospel truth and walk away believing it. And so I think the same thing should apply whether you're listening to Matt Walsh, Michael Knowles, Todd Starnes, Dan Bongino, Candace Owens. Critically think through everything they're saying, find where you align, and certainly find where you don't.
Yeah, very good. All right, moving on. Do you think that we should send detainees to fight the war in Iran to earn citizenship?
This reminds me of a meme I saw a few years ago. where a guy asked, we could have like a kind of entertainment. Whoever wins gets to be free. We can call it Aliens versus Predators and have pedophiles fight illegal aliens.
Oh, I've heard something
Alien
like that.
versus Predator.
It's not a bad idea.
It's not a bad idea.
Sounds to be kind of entertaining.
I think, to answer your question as seriously as I can, that require I be a fan of the war in Iran and want to send anyone to fight it. And so I don't see that as a wise move. I will say I think we should deport far more people than we're deporting now. I think most people on the right probably align with that. But I mean, even in the sense we had a guy here in Houston, speaking of, who was quote unquote American. I hate using that term to refer to people who are first generation just because American should mean more than just a piece of paper. But who was living here in the U.S. as a citizen and who was aiding and abetting terrorists in the form of ISIS through social media and information. And I was asked on my show, what do you think should happen to that guy? And they were like, because we could get into it sometime, but I'm a big prison abolitionist for the most part. I'll explain. Not in the leftist way.
I'm interested to know what that means.
In the crazy right-wing way.
We're going to let all the prisoners free. Yeah, well, I mean, maybe a lot of them. I don't know. Continue on with your answer.
We can certainly free them from the earth. So what I mean by that...
Oh, put them in space.
Yeah.
I got it.
That's what I mean.
Nice. Not a bad idea.
But I think
the robots could use some companions.
With that guy, I said, I think we should just send him to ISIS headquarters if he wants to aid and abet them. And I think it should be totally fair that we put him on a no-fly list. You can never return, and you can feel free to go live among your peers.
Yeah.
I think that should be a totally fair thing to do.
Absolutely. Yeah. Very good. All right. Let's see. This one was actually, I didn't finish this question here, and so it's actually kind of funny whenever you just move into the actual question. Neuralink gave a man his voice back with just a thought. Should we reopen the asylums?
Oh, man. That's a funny segue. Oh, boy. We're going to have to. I mean, the reality is that, and I talked about this before, this gets into spirituality and how what we often coin as mental illness is a distinct lack of Christianity in someone's life. It's total devoid of conscience and the Holy Spirit in one's life. That's why when they say schizophrenia, I go, that sounds an awful lot like demons, actually, like talking to people in your head. Yeah,
I let a schizophrenic stay in my house, and I'm pretty sure he was an MK Ultra experiment. He had a scar behind his ear. And so a lot of people think I'm kind of crazy or whatnot, but I'm like, I don't know, man, I saw the scar.
Yeah.
But opening up I mean, there's a lot of people that either hurt themselves or other people,
right.
And it's like...
And the craziest thing we do is where, by a plea of insanity, we end up letting people out, right? I'm sure you heard the story about the guy, I think it was Dallas, but don't quote me on that, who murdered a 6-year-old boy by bashing his head in with a baseball bat, and 10 years later was out back in the streets again. And so we see over and over, we hear these stories, like the man that killed Irina Zarutska. We hear it all the time, right? These guys who have committed these crimes, they'll say, like, Jordan Neely or whatever his name was, and then George Floyd. These guys, well, they just had issues. They had mental struggles. They struggle with this, that, or the other, to try to kind of create this victim status.
Right. Yeah.
And my response to all mental health crises is, well, there's such a thing as evil, and evil can have mental effects on a person.
Oh, absolutely.
And so we should still punish it as evil, not as struggles.
Certainly, yeah. And then, one of the things I didn't like about what psychology does as a whole is it paints a broad brush over a lot of people's individualistic needs, which, and there's nothing new under the sun, really is just sin and accepting of evilness and wickedness.
And it justifies those things on the basis of, well, it's brain chemistry.
It's just who you are.
It's just who you are. We can't help that. Yes, we certainly can.
Yeah. And we shouldn't allow you to do it.
Correct.
Yeah.
Even if your claim was true, we should still get rid of that guy.
Right. And the fact that there is a wrong and a right, and then we can know what it is and then act on that.
Right. Exactly.
Okay, let's see. Should women be allowed to hold public office?
No. I already answered not vote no. Okay. It's like so a step back. It's like so much easier.
I expected you to squirm around a little bit.
No. I already said no to the suffrage thing. So I feel like this was an easy layup. No.
Sure. Okay.
No, I mean, again, like, I think not only does it devalue the intent of male headship, which has always been good in Christian. I mean, this is Western civilization's precursor, is understanding, like, kings were in charge and queens were largely kind of a performative office because they were married to the king and served as a sort of advisor. Yeah. We can look at the example of Esther for that all the way back in the Old Testament. But Esther never held public office as we see it today. And it's not that there aren't opportunities, right? Like, we talk about Deborah as a judge, and we can point to that, and the left will point to that, and even on the right as an example of why women should lead. But I always use it as an example to say there are opportunities where men have failed so poorly that God will call women to lead. Right. And so it's not even so much the question of whether they should. The question is, why would they? Yeah. And how badly have we, you and I, failed if they need to?
And I'm pretty sure women don't, a lot of them at least, don't want to do that.
Correct.
Like, it's a lot of stress that gets put
I've talked to
them.
ones on my show who are running for office, who I propped up, who've said, like, I don't want to do this.
They just feel compelled because
but
nobody else.
no one else is doing it.
Right. Yeah. A lot of people try to use the example in Judges of like, Deborah was a judge. Actually, if you look back at it, Deborah was never a judge. She was just a prophetess.
Right.
And she never led in going into battle and whatnot, but she was courageous. And that whole book of Judges is basically about how they go back and it gets worse and worse and worse for everybody.
Right.
And it's the men continue to failing, them continue to get further away from God. And then the women end up embarrassing a lot of these men.
Right.
Murdering
It's an
them.
indictment on us.
Yes, absolutely. Which, the woman problem is a man problem.
Right.
And it's just trying to get men to actually like stand up and do that, which I think the Zoomer generation is really
and again,
doing that.
to go back to the misogyny thing, that sometimes means holding women accountable.
Sure.
And saying like, don't eat the fruit, actually. That's actually very bad for you.
Right.
And if we're going to love you correctly and we're going to lead in the right direction, that means telling you what's true about yourself and true of your nature and what God's created you with.
Yeah. And what does the Bible say?
Right.
Yeah.
Always pointing you back to that.
Amen. Very good. Okay, let's see. Oh, if you could tell Charlie Kirk one thing, what would it be?
I think I'm going to have to pull a thank you. I think a lot of people, and even Nick Fuentes, if you want to pull a major detractor of Charlie Kirk, Nick Fuentes, in his basic eulogy a few nights after the passing of Charlie Kirk on his stream, he even talked about the reality that Charlie was, regardless of if you agreed with everything he said politically, an absolute political animal. Like the man was insane.
Yeah.
The work week, the travel, the dedication, the ability to like hold his tongue on certain things, even in order to play political strategy, while also always being truthful and courageous in what he believed. And I think we see in the wake of its hindsight's 2020 how important Charlie Kirk was to holding the movement together. And now it feels like there's a bit of a vacuum, and the issue with the vacuum is unfortunately it takes even the people that we do like and turns them into people that are fighting.
Right.
This is why, like, I used to be a big Ben Shapiro fan. I don't necessarily have any ill will towards Ben Shapiro, but I went to America Fest and I was not only stunned, but heavily disappointed in his speech. Because I thought this is a moment where Charlie's passed. This is the first big event. This is an opportunity as much as is humanly possible to create a sense of unity.
Right.
And instead it seemed like the whole thing was a show for, well, I'll be the next Charlie then. And not in the kind sense of I want to do good,
Hey,
but in the
good
sense
jump
of
on that.
I desire power.
Yeah. And I think there is something to be said about this sort of splitting, actually intentionally like saying these people are not us, instead of saying the common thing, what we are.
Right.
What we are, we can be together.
And that requires something that I'm not seeing either side of the sect do, which is define what it means. Ben Shapiro wants to oust all these people. Candace Owens wants to oust certain people, right? This is a thing that goes all the way across. What are we ousting? Right? Because I agree that we should have certain standards, that if you're not a part of these standards, like if you're a pro-abortion, pro-transgender, obviously you're not in the conservative movement, you're not a traditionalist, you're not even a Christian. But there are also things that we can disagree on that don't dissuade us and discourage us from being conservatives and Christians. And so I'm not seeing almost anyone try to come out and define what that means other than to say, well, I don't like that person and they disagree with me enough that they can't be a part of it, without explaining, well, what's the exact qualifier? You're creating arbitrary lines as if you're in charge of the movement itself.
Would you say maybe this is what we are rather than this is what we are not?
Right. I think that's a fair thing to say, is to define what is the movement then.
Yeah.
If Nick Fuentes can't be a part of it, which maybe you can make an argument for it, or if Candace Owens shouldn't be a part of it, or if Alex Jones shouldn't be a part of it, or if you think that Ben Shapiro shouldn't be a part of it, then I think we need to make a cohesive argument that is, and I know this sounds a little bit out there, but that is very tangible and real, that we say, here's the standards then. Here's what the qualifications are if we want to be a part of this particular movement, and naming those things rather than just pointing at people. Same thing with the deifying the host, pointing at a person and saying, you're not a part of it, rather than acknowledging, okay, so what is it that we're talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's where the next few years is probably where it's going to be going. Is
I think Charlie would have done a great job at that.
Yeah, amen. I mean, I thought he was going to be president one day.
I'm sure he would have,
Yeah.
if he were alive.
Absolutely. Okay, well, let's see. Oh, this is just kind of a side question. It's a good question. Was Jesus a Galilean or a Judean?
Oh. Good historical question. Again, I'm gonna
to prompt people to think.
Right. What I'm gonna say is while I do enjoy theology and I have competed in apologetics, I'm by no means a great theologian, right? I could point to R.C. Sproul. I could point to Vodi Bakum, recently passed. I went to his church for a while.
I like both of those guys.
Great Reformed men. I'm a Reformed
Same.
believer.
Nice. Dutch
Yeah.
Reformed. Yes.
Yep,
Very
yep.
good. Cool. Brother.
And so I'm by no means a great theologian. My usual sphere is politics, which of course I get all of that from theology. But again, I think a lot of this goes back to the bigger question, which is what are we asking and what's the intent, right? Because I've seen a lot of people who will go, well, Jesus was a Palestinian. And the other guy goes, no, Jesus was a Jew. And then they use Jew in this certain way as a sort of battering ram to force you to believe that Judaism is what Christ believed in, modern Judaism. And I think a lot of the issues to that pertain to the way that we use words. And so when we're asking these sorts of questions, I think it's very important to acknowledge what we mean and to acknowledge what impact that has on our theology and our beliefs about the world. Obviously, as a Reformed guy, we know all about dispensationalism as opposed to, say, postmillennial eschatology.
Yeah, that's what I am.
Not to get super, I'm a postmillennialist as well.
Hey,
I get to be happy
it.
about where the world's going.
Amen, me too.
But it gets into those sorts of things where we ask, what is the intent in what we're asking, and what does that mean for what we believe? Because, of course, the Jesus is a Jew line, it's not necessarily that it's inherently untrue. It's that it's used in a certain way as a forceful mechanism for us to adhere to Judean or Judaistic values.
Yeah, I'd say he was a true Jew.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that's why I like the term Israeli a lot.
Yeah.
Or you could even say Ashkenazi or of the various sects, because I think it's important to differentiate.
Yeah, and a lot of people don't think about when did Jews get started, like as a group, all Israelis start to be called Jews rather than like...
Especially post 70 AD, because this all happened mostly hundreds of years later where they impacted through most of Europe, as opposed to actually being from Israel.
I would go back even farther. I would say that it was after the fall of the Jerusalem.
Sure.
Not 70 AD, but like whenever, after the second temple was built, that those people, whenever they got scattered off, I think that's around about that time is whenever they started referring to all themselves as Jews.
Right.
And it's like when actually there was a northern kingdom and a southern kingdom, and that's where the Sumerians come from and all that sort of thing. And so people don't really understand this history.
Of course.
And then they try and co-opt a creed into a geopolitical just entity, I suppose.
Right.
But without that tangent going on, let's see. Oh, okay. Well, you're out of TPUSA. Oh, here's a better one. Okay. Do you think aliens are real, and should we take their oil?
Yes and yes. Define alien.
Good question. So I think that
Illegal?
alien. Well, okay. So no, I'm talking
You're talking about
like,
UFO green guys?
Yeah, UFO green guys.
Certainly real.
Okay, like as in like as people generally think about them, or as I saw J.D. Vance talking about this today as like spiritual entities or beings that we're communicating
Bingo.
with. Yeah, I think that's what it is too.
Demons historically have appeared as a variety of things. When we talk about like all the old temples, the Aztecs, and they had these gods, a lot of people would think they just came up with them, and it's like no. Many of these things they admit, and again, in the same way that Christians are willing to die for their truth, many of these men would have died for it, saying, "I witnessed this God speaking to me. I've seen Zeus."
Right.
Like, and so I think it's very fair to say that as a Christian, then what's the justification for the existence of that thing? My pastor actually has had an experience where he saw an alien, a UFO, and he was young enough, not a believer. He eventually gassed himself into saying it didn't happen, and then when he became a believer, he thought back to that moment and said that was certainly demonic. Is certainly what that was.
Crazy.
And so it's certainly aliens are real. There's too many like shared experiences of people seeing them.
Sure.
But I certainly think it's on the spiritual side of things.
Yeah, I was watching something about how in the Old Testament, if you look at like Ezekiel, and Ezekiel's being brought up into this into the clouds and stuff like that, and he's describing what sounds like a silver spaceship that he gets taken in G-force and all this sort of stuff. So who really knows? The government maybe. Moving on. I'm going to ask it. It's a difficult question. Do you trust Erica Kirk?
No.
No? Okay.
I'll tell you why I don't trust Erica Kirk.
Okay.
Number one, because I trust almost no one.
Okay.
So that was a bit of a jump-in answer, but in the sense that there are very few people that I do trust.
Okay.
Because if I don't personally know you, why in the world would I necessarily believe you?
Sure.
Right. If I'm not, and even then, you can be betrayed by your closest friends. Julius Caesar can point to this. Et tu, Brute. When you talk about people that are on these sort of spheres and sectors, a lot of the issue is that the same as mentioned the deification of hosts, we start to see these people as these sorts of existent people who we must by nature believe about everything. And my return question would simply be, what's the basis for my trust in Erica Kirk? Right? What's the basis? If she's saying true things, of course I believe her.
Sure.
And to a large degree, until there's alternative evidence for any claim she makes, I'll believe the claim because I have hope in humanity. But at the same time, if what we mean by trust is that I take her word for it when the facts disagree, why would I possibly do that?
Sure.
And I don't think there's any real answer to dissuade from that. When the reality is, like, if she says, I hadn't really dated anyone before Charlie, or I would never go and get drinks with a guy, and then we have on national television in a show we're going to get drinks with a guy. You're like, you just lied, right? And so it's not so much that I don't trust you on other things, that I don't think you're maybe still a good human being, but that poses questions. Do I trust you in these other matters?
Right.
And so as far as like institutional trust goes, most of my institutional trust went out in college with COVID going on. When I told my first professor that I would not be wearing a mask in school.
Oh, how did that go?
Oh, it went phenomenally because my professor, I went to a Christian university.
Oh, okay.
My professor told me that I had to put a mask on. I told him I wouldn't be doing that. He threatened to call security on me. And I told him, go ahead, but that's going to be really bad headlines for a Christian conservative college.
Wow, yeah.
And then he just ignored me the rest of the class. And the next class, there were at least 5 other people who didn't have masks on as well. So it started a little movement.
Yeah, that's awesome. You really stood up to him.
Yeah.
You know, that's really cool. Nice.
But that COVID was really the hinging point where, do you trust this person? Suddenly was like, maybe not.
Yeah.
Maybe I don't if I don't know them.
Sure. I usually think about, I usually trust people as far as I can throw them. And what I mean by that is like, okay, I know that we are all sinful human beings, you know, and so I can trust this person to be a sinner.
Right, and someone you have a personal relationship with is different, right? Like my pastor, obviously I'm going to trust to a very large degree because I've had that personal experience with that person, as opposed to somebody that I see on TV who I've never met. And who I know has lied about things, and we all lie, right? Like no one, again, we're all sinful human beings, right? I'm not going to sit around and pretend like I've not lied. But that level of trust of, do you just trust what someone's saying inherently? Why in the world would I do that for anyone?
Yeah, sure. Very good. Okay. Let's see. What is it?
I'm getting the wrap-up sign.
Okay, here. Let's.
I'll give you one more. One more.
Let's see. I'll do one more. Oh, let's see. Which,
pick the best one.
There was a couple more about women voting again. But
I can give you a bunch of notes. We'll just leave it at notes.
Let's see. You think Nick Fuentes will ever marry a woman?
I sure hope so.
Yeah. Amen. Very good.
I know a lot of people, and this is the same thing. It's the opposite of the deification. It's the villainization of people. I hate that so much. I like people being held accountable for their crimes and being held accountable for the things they say. I don't like when we intentionally villainize people and treat them as if they're beyond saving.
Sure.
Even if we fundamentally disagree. There was a sword we found in Germany for the 1500s. I don't know where this is. It's in one of the museums. But in German, Old German, it has written a very interesting etching on the sword. It was an executioner sword, so blunt on the end, but very long, very hefty, designed to chop heads off, right, for executions.
Okay.
And it says, with this sword, so we send you to eternal life with Christ.
Nice, yeah.
And the goal was, you face consequences, sure, but our goal is to still see people going to salvation.
Yeah,
It's still to see people saved.
Sure.
And so you could be the biggest Nick Fuentes hater in the world, and you should still desire that the rumors of homosexuality are false. You still desire to see him get married and to continue to grow in maturity, because even if you think he's right on things, he's still got a lot of maturing to do, as do we all.
Yeah.
And so we hope to see that he grows in the faith, that he grows as a Christian, as a believer.
Absolutely.
That if he is a brother, he continues to be more sanctified, and if he's not, that he becomes a brother in Christ. And that includes getting married, having children, and you know, regardless of, again, opinions, there's obviously bitterness from the way that he's been treated. And I think that's even fair. For a lot of it, because he was wronged quite a bit from the beginning, before he had a lot of the radical opinions he has now.
Yeah.
And I've said before to my pastor, I said, I think one of the big things that would have helped men like this is community.
Yeah, absolutely.
And regardless of beliefs or opinions, one of the things that young men are craving right now is community. That's why we're here at Turning Point. That was a big thing that Charlie was all about, was building that community. That's a big thing that our station is about, going to all these events, building community. And the reality is that regardless of how radical you are or whatever, I want everyone to see the truth and to know that they have, what's the song, you got a friend in me? To know that they have somebody they can come to. That's why I give out my number to people on my business card. It's not some office number. I give out my personal number. I want people to know that there's people out here that want to build that. And when they talk about change, it's not just like profit margins and political commentary. It's, I desire to see a revival and a revolution in our country.
Yeah, absolutely.
Even for the worst of men.
Yeah,
which I'm not saying Nick
absolutely.
Fuentes is, but I'm saying regardless of who you think is, even for the worst of men.
You don't know anything about me, but I was pretty bad.
Most people don't know anything about me. I was also pretty bad. I often, I've talked before and I've said, you know, one day when I see Paul in glory, I'm going to tell him I think I might have him beat on the Chief of Sinners line. I might have. He's going to say, no, but I killed Christians.
That's right, yeah.
And I'm going to turn around and say, well, it wasn't legal when I lived. If it had been a military thing and there was people, you know, being
Maybe
called up,
same thing.
I'm saying I'm not beyond that. None of us really are.
I didn't really think about it like that.
Yeah.
Michael, thank you for answering all my questions in such a
Absolutely.
thoughtful and based way.
Thank you
Appreciate it.
for having me on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I love it. Thank you.
Of course.